ask a couple of questions just real quick, and then I'll because nobody has hit their button yet. I'm assuming nobody has questions after I gave that little speech. But I want to have some clarity on a couple of things. One is people suggest that, and I've seen this suggested many times, that the money that is part of what we're doing with the convention center is money that we ought to just pause and not do the convention center and take that money and put it into this budget. Ms. Lane, could you or any of you respond to our ability to use that money in this budget?
Sure. Thank you, Mayor. In regards to the convention center in particular, the funding for the convention center is through the hotel occupancy tax. And there are restrictions on how those funds can be used. They can only be used for tourism and convention and hotel industries. And that means they cannot be used for our general fund operations. And so that's why the dollars that are being used for the expansion of the convention center cannot be redirected to the general fund because of those restrictions of how we use hot taxes.
Okay. Another one that gets brought up from time to time is this council has looked at trying to future-proof the the idea of the work that's going on with I-35, and so it gets generalized in reference to the cap and stitch, but use that money to plug holes in the budget that you might have. Could you address that, please?
Sure. Similar to the convention center, the city as a whole, we have various funding sources. And so Cap and Stitch is funded. The dollars that have been identified are through certificates of obligation. And those are a debt instrument used to do capital projects. And those dollars cannot be used for, again, general operations.
And then today we heard a couple of people make reference to, in fact, some were very specific about taking a specific amount of money out of Project Connect and plugging a hole. And address that if you would.
Sure. Project Connect is a little bit different but it's different because it was a tax rate election, but it was for a specific project. And the dollars that the voters approved for Project Connect can only be used for those dollars. There's an agreement that the city, once those revenues are realized, that it goes to ATP to facilitate that program or that project.
So the TRE in that case said, if you vote for this, this is what you're going to get, and that's the money would go to Project Connect.
Correct, and there was a contract with the voters to specifically say what we would use those dollars for.
All right. Another question that I have is the idea of, and I don't know how to phrase this, but the way I've heard it is reopening the police contract or doing something of that nature. Mr. Van Enoo, I'd like you to address that situation. First of all, we have a contract, and there's a provision that some make reference to as though it is a blanket provision that allows for us to just reopen it if there's a failed TRE. But you have put out a memo on that. Would you address the issue of whether or not that money is available?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. And the language you're referring to is in the contract with the Austin Police Association, and one of the triggering factors is a voter approval tax rate election that fails. And so we obviously just had a voter approval tax rate election that failed. And then it lays out provisions for potentially reopening that contract should the CFO certify that a reduction is necessary. So, in looking at that, I think it's the context matters. I think the facts and circumstances surrounding the TRE in question matter, and were part of the things I took into consideration in looking at that contract language. We just were talking about the tax rate election for Project Connect, or the Austin Transit Partnership for a light rail system. So one of the things I thought about is in different circumstances, with different contexts and different facts and circumstances, how would this language apply? I think clearly in a situation where we had a tax, were we to have another tax rate election for something for like light rail, and that light rail proposition were to fail, I think most people, perhaps not everybody, but most people would agree, well, we don't need to open up the police contract and make reductions to the police contract because a light rail proposition failed. Alternatively, I thought about the tax rate election that the school district recently held, which was explicitly a tax rate election to fund raises for teachers. I could, foresee a situation in the future, given our 3.5% revenue cap, just to meet, to provide employees with pay raises to stay competitive in the market. We may need to go to the voters and do something similar, tax rate election for employee wage increases. If we were to have something like that and the TRE were to fail, I think I would certainly say, well, in that context, we should be making proportionate reductions to the police contract in line with reductions to other employee wages. And so looking at the circumstances and facts, the context around the TRE that we had, my determination was it was much more like the TRE related to Project Connect, where this was a TRE to fund some very important priorities, but it was to fund new initiatives, things primarily that we weren't currently doing, enhanced services for homelessness, additional funding for park maintenance crews, additional EMS personnel, enhancing our reserves to get them in alignment with the city's financial policies. But it was funding new things over and above what might be considered a base budget. So for those reasons, in this circumstance, I felt like a reduction was not necessary in order for us to the budget was not necessary in order for us to fund the provisions of the police contract.
Okay, thank you. Mayor Pro Tem.